maybe. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm Riley Robinson, the director for Artpace. And thanks for braving our temperatures in our street and our closures. Really appreciate you coming down through all the gauntlet that's our construction downtown. We're so excited for our fall 2022 residents, María José Crespo, Kate Hardy, JD Pluecker, and tonight we're joined by our fall curator, Sofía Hernández Chong Cuy, director of Kunstinstituut Melly. Sadly, Kate's not feeling well and won't be able to join us tonight, so Sofía is going to guide us through her exhibition in her absence. I do need to make a few thanks tonight. The International Artists in Residence Program is supported through generous donations from the Linda Pace Foundation, from the National Endowment for the Arts, the John L. Santikos Charitable Foundation of the San Antonio Area Foundation, the Parker Foundation, the Howard and Betty Health Charitable Fund, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. Also, I really want to give a hand to the Artpace staff who's done a lot for this group of artists, putting up their installations over the last 2 months, working with them really, really closely, working on tonight's event, and all the other amazing things that they do. So I really appreciate the Artpace team here that's doing it, from Casey to Ruben to Lisa to Zan. Where is everybody in here? It's just an amazing group, and I'm really, really honored and proud to work with them. Thank you very much. They deserve it. Also, the Artpace members, we do have a membership booth out front. And even though tonight's event is free for everybody, it does cost. There is a cost associated to this. So joining and becoming an Artpace member really, really helps out and supports Artpace. So we'd appreciate taking a look at that if you can. Also, our Artpace board of directors, who just really amazing group of people who support the arts and really believe in what we're doing here tonight. I first met Sofía as an intern here at Artpace many, many years ago. I think it was in 1999. That was the first time we were here. In many ways, she was our first intern, even before we officially had an internship program. So I was thrilled when Sofía accepted my invitation to come back and choose the artist for the Residency Foundation. So thank you, Sofía. Thanks for traveling all the way from the Netherlands to be here with us tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Riley. And thank you, everyone, for being here this evening with JD, María José, and myself. And a big hug online. I think that Kate Hardy may be connected, hopefully, and watching the program and also learning about the work of her peers that participated in the residency. I also want to extend a big thanks to Riley for inviting me to San Antonio and to Artpace, but not only here to the city, but to Texas to make studio visits earlier in the year and to get to know the art scene, of which is very, very generative in the entire state. And it is a very big state, so it takes a long time, as you very well know, to get from one city to the other to visit studios, but it's one of the most beautiful experiences that Artpace offers. Is an invitation to curators like myself to go and meet artists working in different media and in different cities with different subject matters. So I traveled for many kilometers with Christian, who's not joining us today. She's now appointed curator in the museum in Phoenix, I understand. But I want to also send my big thanks to Christian, who was working here at Artpace and accompanied me to studios all over Texas, including JD Studio, to meet artists and get a sense of some of the concerns that are, happening here in Texas. We always speak of or having grown up in Mexico, in the border town of Mexicali, we always speak about the relationships and the proximity, but the stark differences between the United States and Mexico. And it was with that interest that I came to accept the invitation of Riley to see what else was happening in Texas since I had last been here, not only for my internship, but also to other cities to see exhibitions. And tonight, what we've planned to do is to be able to get a sense of some of the artistic processes and the artistic research that was developed by María José, by JD, and by Kate in order to make not only their residency a great time, but also to make the great work that they're presenting in the galleries. Did everyone get a chance to see the exhibitions? Yeah, okay, so at least I see the majority nodding. And what we've decided to do today was, on the one hand, just speak very briefly about Kate's work, who's absent right now in this presentation, but was very present during the residency. And then to really focus in a dialogue with María José and JD about the residency time here and how the process of research in terms of their ongoing investigations before they came to the residency, but also the research that they did while they were in San Antonio and together traveling through Texas and the vicinity informed the works that you have experienced tonight. So if we could do the first slide, it's there. Kate Hardy, so everyone saw this work already. It was on your way here to the gallery. I have been very happy to experience this work since yesterday that I arrived. And there's many reasons for this. One of them has to do with the fact that it is a canvas that has a particular shape that many women may find familiar. And in any case, it is not a useful object. I would say that as many of the paintings, it doesn't depict something of a utility, but it at least triggers, at the very least, it triggers a number of references that have to do with both art history and business or commerce and one's own embodied knowledge, at least as it pertains to those that are women. One of the things that I really like about the work of Kate Hardy, whose practice I have followed for 20 years and who's been a great influence to my own thinking about exhibition making and community building, has to do with the intersection of what in the 90s we would call art in theory, and that today we can pretty much speak only in more generic terms as discourse. The way in which artistic practice, in which artworks and in which artists are able to create a language that's not necessarily verbal and painterly or visual, but that has a number of crossroads or intersections between these concepts and that is able to speak to or express a moment in time. Kate, when I first met her, as an artist that was working in a collective and that was publishing a magazine called, or a journal called LTTR, Lesbians to the Rescue. And I learned from that period of time of having known Kate a number of things. One of them to be fun and humorous, regardless of the fact that you were dealing with very difficult subjects. And the difficult subjects tended to do with questions around identity or desire or a presentation, self-presentation. And the way in which she was able to bring people together in a conversation, or at least in a, again, bodily experience about difficult issues and to be able to address these in community was quite spectacular. And it was spectacular because it was big, in the sense of it was an amplified sense of community because of the amount of people that came to gather, to listen to others and to observe others. That was really motivating to open up. So the work, the painting, it's one single monumental painting of a shaped canvas that she presents us here in her residency, even though it is very, very dark in the sense that it is of color black or many different black hues, is one that is installed in a very particular way. So who noticed the type of installation that is different from any other painting on a wall? It's floating in the middle of the room. That's an interesting, I love that you say floating, because it appears to be floating, so it's great that you've mentioned that word. What else did we notice from the way that it's installed? Yeah? You walk around it, so excellent. So you walk around it as a sculpture, right? In this kind of Hegelian idea that sculpture, as it is with poetry, is one of the finest expressions of the arts, because you can walk around, and walking around makes you understand many different sides of a single story. So there's not just a front, but there's a back, there's a side, and wherever you are around, you will learn different things of a structure, of how it's made, as you said, and what that brings to your sense of making meaning. No? So I think that it's suspended or that it's floating is a way to also think that it's something that hovers around you, like an institution, or like discourse, but that you can also be able to get a sense of how things are made up, and maybe even make it yourself, or at least be able to unmake it or undo it. And I think that that's one of the things that Kate's practice has always proposed. What is another way that we notice of how it's installed? Someone else? It's on a beam, so it's on a single standing structure and not on a wall. So again, it's not about you facing the work, but it's about you interacting with the work. And it's supported with a support structure, and it is not a wall in this case. No? It is an elemental structure that makes the walls stand. Is there anything else that we could think about the work in the absence of Kate, but the presence of her painting? Yeah?
I see a shape of a heart.
You see a shape of a heart. Very nice. Yeah?
Well, obviously, I like the way that it was positioned, not vertical, because that's exactly how it would be, and it actually has wings, because back when it started and that came, there were wings. You know, before there weren't wings on it, so it's probably not holding you down. It's something that's pushing out, and so it's not the typical way that
I love that you say this, because this is a conversation that I had with Kate yesterday. Before I saw the work, I had seen an image of it, and I asked her how she had thought about the installation of the piece. And I did ask her also whether the work would be installed, if she had thought about installing it vertically at any point. One's personal experience of the shape of the painting. So as women that have used a maxi pad, which is what informs the shape of this canvas, we tend to see it vertically because we place it, no, in our underwear, and our observation of it is vertical. But that not means that that's only one perspective, or the user's perspective, and not generally the beholder of a painting in a museum. I think that once the work, in this case, is presented not vertically, which would be much more kind of, well, if we want to think about gendered or about power, it would generally be a vertical piece. But once the work is turned to the side, then it means that the beholder is not exactly one that's gendered, and that the painting is no longer anymore a maxi pad, right? Or that no longer does it have that shape. And that is the beauty of the arts, is that artists, visual artists, poets, dancers, who we encounter allows us to see the world in a different way, and to have a relationship, whether it's through gender or through commodities in general, in quite a from quite a different perspective. I love also that you mentioned the heart. The heart is also something that makes it funny, even more acceptable, something that would generally be much more shameful in terms of a painting. I wanted to think also artistically about some of the references that the work can bring to us, and some of them have to do with how the work is actually made, or the process, which is what we're going to talk about with María José and G today about their process. But in the images that I saw of Kate making this work is that she actually does not paint with a brush, with a canvas vertically. She actually has a canvas on the ground, and she pours the paint, and the paint must absorb, as it is with also a maxi pad and blood, it must absorb into the canvas. In this case, if you went around the work in terms of how it's installed, it is absorbed by the upholstery and not only the textile. And from there, she then continues pouring the paint, which is how I see it in the images and how she also tells me of the process. And that layering of images, or that layering of colors, is in a way abstract until she paints something recognizable, as it is a heart. And I feel that the kind of demystification that she does, because a lot of the pouring and the spilling of paint onto a canvas that absorbs longer remains within that narrative of abstraction that in the United States has been very widely promoted in terms of one's body and impulse into the work. And in this case, by making something as figurative that is only delineated as a heart, and that looks very jelly as well, because it's a top coat, you know, it's a much more brilliant, and depending on where you walk, you see the iridescence of the paint and the way it glitters, that you are allowed to smile. I mentioned to Kate that her work made me think of many artists from the United States, and one of them, of course, the Pollocks and the Frankenthalers, but that one of the artists that, precisely because of the humor, came to my mind was Claes Oldenburg. And maybe there's more Americans in this room than I'm not one, but can you tell me if you remember any sculpture of Claes Oldenburg? Someone? Yeah, tell me.
Out in Marfa, Texas, they have the horse's hoof that he created.
The which one?
The horse's hoof.
Uh-huh. The horseshoe.
Right.
And how is the horseshoe?
Well, it's kind of like that material, almost a little bit.
But how does it look?
It's huge.
It's huge, exactly. So does anyone else remember another work by Claes Oldenburg? Can you speak high? And how is the work? Huge. Okay, so here we go with another huge. Does anyone else remember another huge image of Oldenburg? A cherry, a fork, whatever you call it. But they're all everyday objects that, just because of the scale and the amplification, really makes us think about what these objects mean into one's daily life. And the idea around the everyday object use every day, but that is in a way the way in which the artist turns something so vernacular into the monumental allows us to think about the importance that they have and the meaning that they may have within our lives. And I think that the painting of Kate, beyond the uses of paint and the way in which the performance of it is there, it allows us to think about, scale and the humor that it involves, but also the importance of making meaning that artists propose in their work. And that's very much what we're going to be talking today. I think that if we go to the next slide, I think that we miss Kate's work with us a process that artists are involved in making their work, and the way in which they create meaning with different shapes, assemblages, sculptures, videos, photography, murals, collage, textile pieces that they make. What I discussed with Maria Jose and JD was that we would talk about a couple of works in the exhibition only so that we could learn through their eyes how to best appreciate them. So one thing that I learned in speaking to them was that Maria Jose and JD made a road trip when they were here. And that's one of the beauties of the residencies, is that artists get to meet each other and get to go vintage shopping, get to go eating around, get to go to take on the road. And in this case, Maria Jose and Jay did do together to the border region of Mexico and the United States, to El Rio in Texas. And when I learned more details about their trip, I had already learned about this sculpture, which is of Maria Jose, that for her, it's a work that is on exhibition. It's one of the 3 installations, 4 actually, that she's created, considering the video as well. The one of movement in a landscape, and the one of recovering from the landscape elements and materials that together would speak of a stage in movement, of a research in movement, and that would also speak of a landscape or a specificity of place that she was interested. So if you can speak to us about this work, Maria Jose, that would be lovely.
Yes, I think one of, so I'm a freshly graduate student and from a master in the Netherlands, and as an artist, territory has been the main subject in my work, and moving to another country and trying to research about, you know, the land and the objects around it and the people around it is very difficult from a distance. So one of the things that allowed me to introduce this landscape also in an European context, whilst I've been in the Netherlands, was using like this vehicle of someone like being inside of a car, of like other transportation method to actually look around this landscape, because I think my installations often as environments rather than installations. So for me, it's really important to have like an access point to it. So in a way, I wanted to bring this like first element into the space that can allow us to maybe navigate around and maybe look around this territory.
And you told me when we were speaking about this work in front of the work, which is a beautiful sculpture that is layered through different types of glass, and that also has been made with found materials. You told me that for you this was a representation both of a car as well as a movement, and that the most evident or palpable representation of the car was in fact the windshield window that's up there. Yeah. But when you said that there were other glass pieces that were on the sides of it, in the body of the sculpture, you said that is much more representative of the movement rather than of a vehicle in itself. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the movement and about the way in which this trip that you did together with JD occurred?
Yeah, I think, that's really important, like movement, because, you know, it's really different to see or to get to know, I guess, like a territory from like a state of, you know, no movement that can be through an image, through, for instance, in an archive, rather than like going to a site and make these visits, or, you know, like being on the movement and see by the wind, like by the windshield, like these landscapes. And for me, in a sense, it's also how artistic research comes into mind, where you are like maybe web scraping, or you're like looking into these archives, or like maybe you did like some site visit and you have all this information that is also around you, and you know, it's like a way of like displaying also like all these found materials together with all this information that is being accumulated. And for me, it makes sense also like accumulation of information whilst researching with the accumulation of infrastructures in the context of border environments also.
Maybe we can go to the next image and tell us a little bit about the trip. And I would also like you to participate in the next image. Yeah?
Yeah, so then the most exciting thing about also being here in Texas in this first time to come back to the border between Mexico and United States and actually do site visits, because whilst I've been obviously in the Netherlands, I have been researching in the internet and doing and developing all these other methodologies for artistic research. So for me, it was really excited, and also to be here to be able to do a site visit, but also to know another side of the border, because in Tijuana, where I'm from, is, you know, we only know the border as in a wall, and both cities are like really active cities. So the activity of the city is so close to the wall in both sides that is like there is no really land around that area. So for me also, being here in Texas, it was like to know how it functions, the border in another land. And I wanted to go to visit the Rio Grande and Rio Bravo, because when I thought that I was coming, I was thinking about the Rio Grande and Rio Bravo, and I was really interested on this duality that had like one body of water, or their name change. So and then I wanted to go, and then JD was like, "Oh, I love to do road trips, so I'm surely can go with you to do this."
So if we can go to the next image, and JD, if you could tell us a little bit about your perspective of the experience. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think first just to say thank you to your help getting the show together, and yeah. So when María José talked about going to see the river, and I got really excited, and I think I was lost in my own project, which we will talk about later. But it was a chance to kind of get out of the thoughts that were occupying me kind of obsessively, and then also to return to a place where I've spent a lot of time. I've spent a lot of time in Coahuila on the border on the other side from Nuevo Laredo. And so it was also a chance. I think I always get excited also when I have friends. I lived in Tijuana for 2 years, and María José and I have a lot of friends in common. And so having her here in the residency and arriving was very comforting, because it was like, oh, okay, we have a lot of folks in common. And also that opportunity to show someone from outside of Texas this ridiculous and horrific and wonderful and scary place is always something that I get really excited about, because I think people come, in my experience, with a lot of ideas and a lot of preconceptions, but I think the land and the people here often challenge a lot of those ideas very quickly. And so, yeah, we made this trip. This was in this really strange area in Del Rio. I also love looking at maps, so I knew María José needed to get images from the river, but actually getting to the river in a place like Del Rio and in that area is complicated because of all of the walls, because of the remoteness, because of the militarization and the police presence, and all of these layers. And so I kind of we were at the hotel in Del Rio, and I was studying the maps to try to figure out like which way can we go and how can we turn and how can we actually get there. We found this really strange stretch of a neighborhood that's just houses all along the river on this side, with a fence that Biden built in the last year on the other side of the road, cutting off this population from this neighborhood from everywhere else. And then on the other side, we went into an abandoned lot with an abandoned building. And then this was where María José took a lot of the images that are in the film. But there was a park on the other side, and there was banda music and música mexicana regional, and people partying and playing, and horses in the river, and kids swimming, and dogs swimming, and people having a great time. And I think it's just such a reminder about the ways that folks in Mexico use the river, and the ways that in the US, the walls and the militarization literally cuts people off from visiting the river or having any use, or having any recreation at the river.
Yeah, I guess, and also it was, I mean, whilst trying to get close to the river, like one week before, I was in the archives, like looking into the maps and into this really beautiful archive from W.D. Smithers, who has like a bunch of photographies during the 20th century construction of the wall, but he has a lot of images around the Big Bend area, and it was quite amazing to see that a lot of like the views that he had, it could be fine still, like in this land. So that's how I guess I'm so interested also in how temporalities, you know, are found in these archives, but can be also found on site, and they kind of clash together, but they recognize each other at the same time. So it was really beautiful to find this scene where it's like there was like these folks in the other side of the river, and it was just this same scene that I saw also on the archives, but you know, in another moment.
Can you give a little bit, I heard you speak earlier about the use of light as a kind of signaling in the border between people, and it's also in your video work.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about this?
Yes. Well, one of the things that I found on the archive was these images of the avisadores, who were like these folks that were using like little round mirrors to send signals to other Mexicans, well, basically migrants that were also like traversing this area, and it was they had like their own system that, you know, this code that were like sending to each other, and it was like a secret, so no American people will know about it, but like only around these people will know about it. So I guess that action of like those informalities contrasted with like these like built environments that were about to be, you know, were about to function, is this like contrast about these two type of you know, negotiating in the landscape that interested me a lot. And so we took like our little mirror and we tried to, you know, like, because also these images that I found of like the man holding the little mirror on the hand was also like, obviously wasn't, the photographer didn't caught like the person doing the signal, but it was like a performance, you know, of like that person allowing the photographer to capture that moment. So, and it is also how the border is, no? It's like a construction. It is like, you know, like these performatic actions towards a certain end. So
I think that the nice thing is that you're able to do, in both cases, field research, meaning going into the specificity of the land, of the territory, and also archival research, which means going into the depths of the boxes. And this happens in both of you, that you go to the archives, you do the research of the documents, you re-photograph when necessary, but you also produce new images when you actually do the field research, and you're out there in the cities, in the territories that you're investigating. So maybe we go to the next image. And oh and behold, we have a very, you're like, now. I'm also like this, by the way. We are now in JD's exhibition, and this is one of a number of installations, one of 6 installations that surround one other installation, but it's part of an exhibition that really creates or embraces the figure of 2 mothers, and what JD calls the dyke mom. And we do have the protagonist of the dyke mom in the room, Linda, and I could see that it's you, yes. So it's very great that, an applause to Linda, yay! The dyke mom that has traveled to join us and celebrate the opening and be able to see the portrait that very beautifully JD has done. And we also have another collaborator who I will mention later. But for now, JD, we're going from your exhibition, María José, to JD's, and we're going to talk about one of the 6 installations that surround a central work or portrait in his gallery.
Nice. So this piece is called Gregg County Courthouse, Longview, Texas. And it does involve site research, and it does involve a lot of research in the archive. And I think it also kind of moves my work in other directions. So it's the only one in the space that's not on pedestals, which is important. There's a lot of stories that are inside of this piece, and I can tell a couple of them. For one, the work is dealing with my mother's family. My mother's family is 7 generations here in the state of Texas. And these original settler colonial families who came to Mexico in the early 19th century, which is typically talked about within genealogy as some kind of wonderful thing to celebrate. And I think I'm turning that on its head and thinking about what other kinds of legacies are there in terms of white supremacy specifically. This piece is dealing with that. On one side of the family, the Walters family, on my mother's side is from in between here and Houston. I'm from Houston. And Jacob Walters was the brigadier general in charge of the Texas National Guard in the 1920s, teens and 20s. And as part of that, wrote a book on martial law and how to impose martial law in the state of Texas at that time of rampant racial violence and massacres by white people against African Americans. And specifically in Longview, in 1919, during the Red Summer, there was a series of racial rebellions and uprisings around the country, and then massacres by white folks pushing back in Tulsa and Chicago and Washington, D.C., and in Longview specifically. And because of that involvement of that ancestor, each site, each one of the 6 what I call object poems, around the central one is related to a different aspect of my mother's family. And so this one was after my visit to Longview, where I spent a few days. And also this one ties back to media, because I don't know how many people grew up remembering or remember growing up or seeing this advertisement on television for Pace Bacani salsa, the one that ends with "Get a rope." Yeah.
Did anyone see it?
Raise your hand if you've seen it. Yeah, I told Sofia, like, people in Texas, people in the US of a certain age have seen it. So I ended up thinking a lot about that.
For those that haven't seen it.
Yeah. So it's the advertisement is from the 80s, and it's a chuck wagon. So there's all these kind of cowboys out on the range, and they're passing around salsa. And the Pace Bacani salsa runs out. And another cowboy comes along and says, "Oh, well, here's another salsa." And then someone says, "But this isn't from San Antonio, where all the authentic salsa is made. This is from New York City." And then everyone goes, "New York City?" And then this guy says, "Get a rope." And it's the punchline. It's the joke. It's funny. And I grew up watching that and not knowing this history of white violence in Texas, laughed. I think we all did. But once you put this then together with this history of lynchings that, of course, Mexican Americans and African Americans were lynched throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries here in Texas, and that history that Mónica Muñoz Martínez, a Tejana historian, has brought to light so powerfully. Andrea Roberts, a historian, Dr. Andrea Roberts, and the African American community have brought these stories to light, remembrance projects led by Black and Brown historians. And so a lot of this is listening to those historians and to those histories, and then re-listening to this advertisement. And of course, thinking about the money and where the money is coming from for all of this that's around us. I literally went to Longview and was going to do the site visits as I normally do, which is to collect objects from the sites, and I wasn't moved to do it. I didn't want to pick up trash that day, which was very strange for me because normally I love that. And you can see it in the other pieces. So I ended up going to antique stores and looking for ropes, and then also ended up buying all of these doilies and embroidered pieces. In all the antique stores I've been to in small towns in Texas, there's always little plastic bags at the back of the stores where they stuff in 1 million doilies and embroidered pieces that women in those towns have made and that no one values anymore and is throwing away. So I gathered those up, and then I built this structure, dismantled all the rope, disassembled all of it, and then created a structure that I hope the viewer wants to lie down on, like a hammock, or like climb up into a stairway to heaven or something like that. But it won't hold you. It's fragile and it's falling apart as we speak. And then there's on one side you can't see it in this picture, but there's a tracing of the ad from YouTube. And then on this side, there's an embroidered piece that's a couched embroidered piece with the disassembled rope.
What I think is very strong about this work, for those that did go to JD's exhibition, is that it's one of the installations that does not use a pedestal, an existing pedestal, whether small or large, white or of wood, but instead it uses a very material that comes from the kind of resistance to the site, the rope, in this case undone, as a support structure for yet another narrative, which is the one of the doilies, which is, in this case, in the case of the larger body of work presented in the exhibition, the knitting itself is repeated throughout. And maybe we could go to the next image. Yeah. So we could see the rope and other knits there. But maybe you could speak a little bit about the contrast.
Yeah, so this one is called Carpenter Road, Humble, Texas. And this one comes out of a family story. There's a small tracing there on the pedestal that has a series of emails between my mother and her cousin. I was raised knowing this uncle who stuttered. And at some point, my mother told me that the uncle stuttered because he was beaten and tarred and feathered by the KKK. Because he was a unionist, because he was a Catholic, it's unclear. But then she went to ask his daughter, and his daughter denied it. And the tracing is a visual poem that I made out of those emails. And then visiting the site, I made the first visit to the site about 4 years ago with my mom and my dad. I was working on a previous project with my dad called The Unsettlement's Dad. And so some of those objects were gathered 4 years ago, and some were gathered during the residency when I made a visit in Humble. That's where the crawfish castles came from as well. Yeah.
So if we go to the next image, we're going to go back to this idea of the archive that's separate from the field research that happens on site with a collection of materials and the assemblage of these materials to create meaning through an installation. I want us to go back to the image archive, but before that, I want to pick up on something that JD said earlier, which is that María José and JD had met just now through Artpace, but that they had found a number of friends in common because of JD's own time in Tijuana, which is where María José has been for many years before having gone to the Netherlands for the last 2. And one of the things to bring back the figure of Kate Hardy, who cannot join us tonight, but is very much, through her work, very present, is that JD has been known and has moved a lot in Mexico and has also been known as a great poet and also a translator of poetry. And I have worked with many artists in my past years and up to now that have this expanded practice, that are artists, that are writers, that are performers, that are organizers, that are activists. And for me, it was important to bring these 3 artists together, Kate Hardy, JD, and María José, very much because of a book that María José had pointed me to earlier on when I had just met her, a book that was only in PDF, actually, no, if I recall. And that I came to learn here in Texas that JD was a translator of the piece in semiotext, which is Asaic Valencia, or Capitalism. And this connected to me to say it would be an interesting group also to bring someone like Kate Hardy into this, because of the way in which semiotext has really brought in to the American readers an intersection of psychoanalysis, critical or literary criticism, actually, and art theory together. And one of the one that I most follow is an editorial line that it's called Native Agents. And Native Agents, which has been headed by Chris Kraus for a long time, is one of the most interesting, I would say, feminist proposals editorially that has existed for quite some time. No? So I think that before I jump in there, I want to go back to the uses of the archive, and in this case of image as text, as María José has been working on. And here's one detail. Well, here's actually a large image of the mural that's in her show. And if we could go to the next, we see here one detail. And if we can go to the next image. Yeah. So we are looking now at the bottom right image of the mural. And maybe to decipher this image as text, I asked María José to talk a little bit about the mural, but specifically hone down in one detail so that we could learn how to better appreciate the larger mural piece.
Yes. Well, as I was saying, a lot of this exhibition is about how I see, or how I understand my own artistic research. And I guess that plays a little bit with politics of display, either in an archive or how things are found in a given territory or space. And for me, going into the archive happens to be not only finding maybe a text or a map, but as we are mediated by other other tools, other devices. It's not it's the pure archive that is meant to only be reproduced by the means that our archives are meant to reproduce, or are meant to be handled But for me, this way of existing collapse with the way that we actually do research and see things on the internet and how we find things. So I wanted to bring, for me, collaging allows me to layer all these experiences as how a file of a treaty, or how a file of an image that that is part of a larger encyclopedia about the border or so on. It's part of it's kind of existing at the same time with these contemporary tools. So I wanted also to play with these different materialities and as found objects also in the internet. So not only found objects on territories, but also found objects as an archive on a website, or as a found object in an archive or in a site visit on an archive. So, and for instance, exactly in this image, whilst before going to the site visit in Del Rio, after seeing a lot of maps in the archives, etc., I look also into Google Maps, and I was really, I was really impressed that this idea of the same river that is two, that has two names, and it's thought as two rivers, Grande and Bravo, are actually represented as two different rivers on Google Maps, where it's obviously it's the same one. So I was kind of also bringing this image to to pin my experience on how this duality is not only thought but also actually represented by a larger mass media device. And I wanted to bring that, and also layer maybe just the barcode of the the archive file of the map of Rio Grande in Texas. So, and that's how, for me, that's just at the moment, it's like a really rich experience. How things come to me, how things are like displayed, and how is like that process as an artist, because I'm not I'm not a scholar that research archives as to write a paper, but I do sculpture and I do images. So it's like this idea of also, and I think distance, being in a distance from the Netherlands from the border, also allowed me to have this sort of like agency in the files to chop them and like collaging them, Yeah.
I think that the distance is something quite interesting also, because we don't experience it only geographically, but it also comes as a thinking about the image after a period of lockdown. Today, someone asked me, like, how did you do it in the lockdown? Like, the lockdown just ended for us in the Netherlands in February, meaning it had been 2 years that we had been closed and things had just opened. So I do think that here, while things were still open and running in other countries, that was not the case. So images were the way in which we related to most of the landscape and the materials and meaning making in general. And that the case of having been brought up in the border, but having been removed from that physically, to analyze what it means, what's the language, and also to find that duality of Rio Bravo, Rio Grande, even more absurd, is something that I think exists there. Let's go to the next image. We're back in JD's space, and for me, it's an important moment right now to talk about also JD's collaboration with Barbara Ann, who I believe is in the room as well. Oh, yay, applause, thank you. Yay, the godmother of JD. And all these women in your life, eh? Another mom. So I was struck by an element in the installation, which is this cloud that is here. And maybe we could go to the next image. And for me, the installation, the exhibition of JD is, it's a homage to the Dyke mom, to Linda, and it's embraced by your biological mom. And in this case, the way in which we can interpret this homage is by the way not only in which you've gathered an archive of a person, Linda, but the way in which you've thought about that archive as a poem in and of itself, and that you have taken some of the diagrams sketched out by Linda early on and made the material, in this case in collaboration with Barbara Ann. So if you could tell us about this element that we find in your installation.
Yeah, so first a thank you to Barbara Ann Thielman for assisting me with the needle-pointed bricks that are holding open the door to the gallery. It says closet, then there's another one that says moms, which are based off of these needle-pointed bricks that my mom made when I was a kid and that I had holding open the door of my bedroom. And so we remade a bunch of them for the exhibit. And then we also made the clouds together. And the clouds are based off of this design that Linda L. Anderson did in the first journal that's in the archive from the 70s. And this was a design that she made, kind of sketching in her diary, in her journal, as something that she dreamed about making. And there were very specific instructions about how it should hang, what each item was made out of. And back in July, we were talking on the phone. I should give some background. I'm going to get lost in this, so you can pull me back.
Maybe I'm going to give like one specific context.
You know how I go off.
I know. I'm going to give one specific context because right now we're looking at a very, very small detail of an installation that consists of a circle made out of cardboard boxes and file boxes, in which it is divided in half, and we'll see an image right now of a collection of books. The boxes contain, and the file boxes contain materials that Linda has collected throughout her life The books that are in the ground, on the floor, laying and crisscrossing the circle like a diameter and a half, are books from her collection. And we can find there a lot of major references today, but everything from Olivia Butler to Judith Butler, I would say. But these were pretty much first editions. And we see on top of the boxes a number of drawings, tracings that JD has done that are actually tracings from the notebooks themselves that are lying on the floor amongst the books. Linda is the Dyke Mom because...
Right, so, I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of autobiographical stuff in this work, and I think it's in my past with Antena and with language justice work and with literary experimentation work through that, I kind of deflected off to become an interpreter and translator and didn't talk about myself in any way until the last few years. So now we get to be really uncomfortable and talk about myself.
About the research question.
Which one?
He has a very good research question, which allows him to make this installation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary research question for me was, I initially started the Unsettlements Project thinking that it was about ancestors and diving into this ancestral legacies and white supremacy and heterosexism and misogyny and patriarchy and all of these different levels within my blood family. And over the course, I've thought of the Unsettlements as a 12-year project from when my daughter started school until when she graduates in 8 years. So we're 4 years into the project. And in the last year, 2 years, I mean, I think I was questioning genealogy and traditional ways of talking about genealogy from the very beginning. But I think last year especially, the kind of sense of queer lineage and the sense of who has brought me to this place where I am today, who has kind of brought me into my body in a way where I think about my body as something that belongs to me and not as something that, and something that I can alter and change. I think that comes very much from my Dyke Mom, from Linda, who really adopted me and took care of me at a moment when no one else was. And my parents are very grateful to her for that. And I think then it's this talking on the phone over the summer with Linda, realizing that a lot of these archives were about to go into the trash, literally pulling some of them out of the trash, and saying, you know, after a lifetime as a working class lesbian, as a lesbian feminist, labor organizer, writer, poet, that she had collected every single scrap over the course of her lifetime and not let it go. I said, no, we're not throwing that away, and you might not have any children, but I'm your child, and that's not happening. And pulled it out.
Yeah, what I like very much about, I like many things about the installation, and it's a wonderful portrait of a woman, and of a woman that has created community or that is always looking in the ways in which creates community. What I really like about the motivations behind this work and how it's expressed in the work itself in a very generous way is that you ask yourself, what were the tools that Linda had to help me through this vulnerable moment? So instead of focusing in your own self or in Linda alone, you chose to see what has created the strength and the generosity and the manners in which Linda has allowed me to come out of this challenging period and to become the person that I am now. And I feel that the installation itself presents the tools, presents the ideas, presents the memories and the very struggles that that the Dyke Mom, Linda, has gone through to enable youth to also carry on with strength and move beyond that. And the beauty of the archive here is done through the tracings that JD does that are above the boxes laying. We talked a lot about what it means to lay them on the boxes instead of, say, putting them on the wall. but it also lies on looking at the bibliographies that are there and the notebooks, and certainly looking at the amount of pins that hold the drawings, the tracings in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think this specific piece is one that really helped me. It's a journal entry from the 1980s that Linda wrote and that I traced, but I only traced certain words to create a poem out of the diary entry. That was important to me. We had a lot of conversations about how it was going to materialize in the space. And finally, I think we both decided, like, no, you go do it. And so I went and did this. And we sat today and read every single one in a circle and moved around and cried a lot. And this one specifically, like, I think we sat there and realized, like, this is not your work and it's not my work. It's both of our works. So en español se dice se plasman las dos cosas. Like, it brings us together, or it, like, yeah.
Well, like the cross that knits.
It knits us together, yeah. We were talking today about the cross stitch and the ways that knitting happens.
Yeah. So when you see it, this, just so you know, this is our PowerPoint excellence that puts the yellow mark so that you notice the circle.
It's not in the piece.
It's not in the piece. It's just a PowerPoint excellence so that we could point you to the fact that Linda's drawing is what is the sketch for the actual shape of the installation. So the books are the line and the circle are the boxes. So that's a PowerPoint mastery for you all. And if we go to the next slide, I think that we're done, no? Okay. I think that we wanted to close that with a PowerPoint excellence, just so that you could see a little bit also about the process and dialogue of how we've talked about the works now that they're here, and we've talked about the process, and how we wanted to give you also tools, as Linda has given to JD, to be able to experience the work with a little bit more background of the process. And I think that what's very important is that to know that every artist has a very different artistic process. The ones that are here, Kate Hardy, María José, and JD, is one that brings into it field research, archival research, turning things around to give another meaning. Things that are familiar are just slightly shifted or overturned in general to be able to grant you a different perspective of the life that we live in today. And that hopefully that this artist talk allows you to go back to the exhibitions and see them with more appreciation for what the artists have done. Kate, as I said, is unable to join us right now, but she's very happy to be here. And this painting that she has done, I think, is filled with love, hence the heart, and humor, and maybe some fashion here and there. But certainly it is a wild, strange piece that I'm sure any of us would want to see in a museum or hang at home. And I think that that's very funny as well. So thank you very much, María José and JD and Kate by the distance. And thank you all for listening so attentively.
Thank you, thank you.
Riley just reminded me of something very important. Are there any questions? Maybe we can also have the questions, if they're not going to be voiced in this room. We're going to be here in the opening, and the artists are very happy to answer to any questions about their work. They're going to be in their spaces. I hope Linda can also be there with JD. And in the courtyard, I'm gonna be in the courtyard as well, smoking some puffs. And I have to say that we're all San Antonians now. We went to do our hairs, our nails. We went shopping for the clothing and the accessories. So we feel very much at home right now. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and let's have a drink and see the shows. Nice, ¿no? ¿Te gustó? Sí. Diver, ¿no?